Welcome to week 4 of the Veritas Forum. The first 3 weeks, by the way, Jason, were very heady stuff like objective truth and biblical reliability and all kinds of crazy stuff. But Jason was gracious enough to join us, and I heard Jason speak on a lead podcast through our Central District conference, and was really captivated by what he had to say, talking about hybrid church. I may ask him a little bit about that if we have the time. But as we were thinking about what would be a great fourth week, got to think like, there's a lot of conversation around AI these days, and I am ill-equipped to have that conversation. And so, what if you bring in someone who is an author, actually currently finishing up a book, which we can talk about at the end. And I heard you actually on that lead pod about hybrid church, you spoke a lot about AI. I think, Chat GPT was really coming online at that time. And so you share some thoughts on that. Um, First things first, Jason, would you share a little bit of your bio? You're an author, you're a business owner, and you have a ministry out of that. Kind of who are you? And then in either order, how did you come to discover Jesus?
Well, thanks for having me. First off, it's good to be here, and I look forward to our conversation. And I'm glad that whatever I said on Lead Pods meant that I got another invite. So
Mhm.
that's good. My ministry is called Midnight Oil Productions. I am a passionate Jesus follower, and I have felt like the reason I was put on the planet was to help people communicate the gospel in as effective a way as possible. And so I got my start in ministry about 27 years ago at a large United Methodist church in Ohio called Ginghamsburg United Methodist Church, a church well known for using media and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And I really came to faith at an early age. I think my memory of first praying sort of the sinner's prayer or whatever was like 4 or 5 years old. And so I grew up in the church. I always felt like as a kid, though, while I really loved church and Jesus was real in my life, church was kind of boring sometimes. And
What?
yeah, can you believe it? So at the same time that I was like, going to church every Sunday and all that, I was really inspired by movies and
Hmm.
animation and all those sorts of things. And so, um, it's odd to say this, but when I was in about third grade, I knew that I wanted to be an artist when I grew up. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but whether it was working in the movies or cartoons or whatever. And I had the ability to draw even back in those days. So everybody wanted me to draw pictures. And um, so I went to art school and commercial art school. And while I was there, well, let me back up. I felt a call to ministry between my junior high and high school year. So over the summer, I went on a retreat, and it was as close as I had ever heard the audible voice of God
Hmm.
tell me that I want you to go into ministry. And I only knew two paths. You could be a pastor, or you could be a music person. And I felt like I was created to be an artist. So I didn't know what that meant because I didn't really feel
Hmm.
call to be either of those things. So I thought I'd have to be like a youth pastor that designed T-shirts on the side or something. And and over the summer, actually, I'm sorry. After I graduated, I was in art school, and during one of those summers, I was playing in a Christian band, looking for freelance work, and couldn't find enough. And the guy said, "Hey, our church uses graphic artists. You should talk to them." And I thought, "What church knows anything about graphic artists?" But
Uh-huh.
guy called on my behalf. That was Ginghamsburg. They started off with one project, which became an internship, and then I became full time staff, and the rest is history. So I've spent the last 25 years or so consulting with churches on communications type stuff, media. During the pandemic, I did a lot of work around hybrid, as you talked about. I wrote a book
Hmm.
called Both and Maximizing Worship, Maximizing Hybrid Worship for In-Person and Online Engagement. And all of that has led me to embracing the tools of AI and how do we in the church use those tools to better communicate the gospel and how do we how do we do that responsibly and carefully, because there are upsides and downsides, as
Yep.
we'll talk about.
Yep.
So
Oh, very good. Yeah. Yeah, tonight, honestly, that's really it. I'm just like I was sharing with you earlier, just a couple a couple big questions, and obviously hopefully a little bit will bubble up from that. But just is it, is AI going to become self-aware and like Terminator taught us and launch missiles at us, or is it going to be an amazing tool that, blesses our life and becomes the next automobile and television and things that, at first were scary, but now are a way of life. So before we jump into some of the pros and cons, I think it's good to define terms a little bit. So when we talk about AI, what are we talking about? Because I think if I'm wrong, correct me, but like, I mean, we obviously had AI, a decade ago to some degree. I think we spell check on our computers is probably what some form of AI.
yes,
We're all using Google Maps to get around town, and that's
yep,
obviously a form of AI, and we never had any concern about it. But something's changed in the last couple of years. Even like Elon Musk and others said, "Whoa, let's slow this down, this development, because of how fast it's going and what it could create." So, when we talk about AI, artificial intelligence, what exactly are we talking about, or are
yeah.
you
Well,
talking about?
sure, sure. Well, first of all, I'm glad that that you know what AI stands for, because one time recently I was doing a training and someone said, "What does AI stand for?" And someone in the chat said artificial insemination, and I said, "No, that's not this. That's not the topic for today. We're not talking about animal husbandry or anything like that." Literally happened in my training the other day, but
It's good.
artificial intelligence has been around for a long time, as you said. Believe it or not, the first chatbot was actually developed in the late 60s.
Hmm.
So we've had chat. I mean, it was very rudimentary, didn't do a whole lot. And there are sort of two categories of AI that I write about in the book. One is what is sort of known as traditional AI, and that is the kind of AI that we've had around for a long time. It's good at analysis and fraud detection, and all those kinds of things. Algorithms that when you are on Amazon and you're shopping or you're looking for certain things, the reason it'll deliver up suggestions is that the algorithms have
Hmm.
learned through artificial intelligence, if you like this, this, and this, you're probably going to like this too. And of course, Google has been finishing our sentences for a long time. When
Yep.
you go to search for something, it types in the rest. Um, our GPS, the GPS itself is not AI, but the routing is artificial intelligence. And in
Hmm.
fact, it will learn the places you travel and offer up suggestions. So that AI has been around for a long time. The new sort of corner that we've turned that feels almost as if we hopped into Marty McFly's DeLorean along with Doc Brown
Yep.
and moved into the future in an instant is what is called generative AI. And so generative AI came upon the scene in a more solid form in November of 22 when ChatGPT was announced. And so ChatGPT was a whole different animal as far as chatbots go, and could actually communicate the way humans communicate. And so there's a couple of terms that would be helpful probably for people to know. One is LLMs, large language models. That's what ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and some of these other chatbots are. And so a large language model has learned how to communicate in a way that humans communicate. And so it used to be that you'd have to be a programmer, learn C++ or basic or something like that to talk to the computer. Now you talk to the computer the way you talk to a human being, and it
Yep.
understands because of another term, natural language processing. And so, through neural networks, through teaching the computer, the artificial intelligence, to think like humans think in a way, I guess,
Hmm.
it now can process the things that we ask it, and it can then communicate to us using that natural language processing in a way that doesn't require that you have to learn a whole new language. And in fact, there's a way in which if you talk to it too sort of disconnected or nerdy or whatever, it doesn't understand you as well as just talking to it like you're talking to another person. So that's the big shift. And generative AI started primarily with being able to generate text. So you give it text and it would generate human-like text. But it's really gotten more and more powerful. So there was imagery came on the scene pretty early on, but it wasn't all that great. And just a couple of iterations in, it's now to the place where the imagery you can create is almost undetectable
Mm-hmm.
from photography, which is both really exciting and sort of scary.
Mm-hmm.
It can help you code. It can now write really, really incredible music. It's just the tools are unbelievable. And I think in the church, um, we have an opportunity. You can either be curious and lean into this and try and understand what it is. You can be afraid of it and run away and sort of bury your head in the sand. Or I think you can kind of embrace it and use it for what it's good at. And what we can't do, I don't think any of us should ignore it because it's not a trend that's
Mm-hmm.
going away. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's here to stay, and it's only going to become more prominent in the world that we live in.
Yeah. So let's start there. That's a great way of saying that. Yeah. Ignoring is not an option. Well, it is an option, but it doesn't produce anything. So let's start with the positive. Actually, that's actually what kind of drew me to you on that lead pod was you had a positive view of hybrid church, and while many around me, when I heard the lead pod, things were kind of winding down, or truthfully had mostly wound down when it came to COVID, and so people were kind of doing the whole like get back to real church,
Yeah,
and however, we found it to be very positive, creating a
yeah,
really great online experience for people who are elderly, on vacation, whatever.
yep,
And so not poo-pooing things is a good thing. Also, I have, some, pastor friends who say like accessing God's word, the Bible on your phone is the worst thing in the world. You should be carrying that paper Bible. You're much
yeah.
more serious. So it's kind of that mindset. So how do we start in the church. How do we in the church,
Sure.
what are some of the possibilities? And maybe
Yeah,
go beyond that church/culture. What are some of the possibilities that you see out there?
absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm someone who is embracing the technology, but I also think we have to exercise restraint.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always just like to start by framing the conversation by saying that AI is neither inherently good
Mm-hmm.
nor is it inherently evil. It is a neutral tool.
Yep.
And so in the book, I liken it to the idea of it being like an axe. An axe is an excellent tool for cutting down a tree and cutting up firewood and making it manageable and starting fire. But you have to learn how to swing an axe, or you might cut off your foot, or smack
Yep.
yourself in the face, or throw out your back. Or so you have to learn how to wield that tool. There are probably other ways that you could knock down a tree and prepare firewood, but it's going to be a lot easier with an axe than it would be without it. And then,
Mm-hmm.
of course, some people take an axe and they will swing it at someone else.
Yep.
It can be used as a weapon, it can be used in a negative way. I feel the same way about AI. AI can be a really incredible tool for better communicating God's message to the world. It can also be used to fraudulently make it look as if a presidential candidate is saying
Mm-hmm.
a thing, or deceiving people and those kinds of things. So it's they're going to be bad actors,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the danger of AI is really that it can do it's so convincing. But let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about the positives for a moment.
Yep.
I am a huge fan of using image in the way that we teach. So I've been a proponent for 20 years now, 20 more than 20 years really, of using screens in worship.
Mm-hmm.
There is a statistic, a study that they did back in 2008, I believe it was, as when it began, that found that we are 65% visual learners as a culture, and learning
Mm.
increases by 400% when you use image to teach.
Wow.
And so, if you want people to be 400 times more likely to go home from your Sunday worship experience or whatever day you worship, and retain what they experience, then you'll use more images. And that's not. I'm going to get on a different stump here for just a second.
Mm-hmm.
Too many of us treat our screens like they're a giant piece of paper. and we take
Mm-hmm.
everything that used to be in the hymnal and the Bible and the bulletin.
Yep.
So we do announcements and we do song lyrics and we do scripture, but the screen is more of a canvas that we can paint pictures on. I
Hmm.
like to think of it as
That's
the
good.
stained glass window of today. You know,
Hmm.
we have the ability to depict these images that are transformational. And according to these studies, you're 400 times more likely to remember what you experienced if there's an image connected. So let's talk about AI for a moment and how that intersects with this idea. First off, if anybody who is participating tonight or listening later has ever bought a stock photo, you know that number one, it can be hard to find the right stock photo. You look and you
Yep.
look and you look, and sometimes you have to compromise, and they can be a little bit expensive, 30, $35 a piece or whatever. And so for some churches, smaller churches, that's probably not something they're going to be able to do on a
Mm-hmm.
regular basis. With AI, you now have the ability to describe what it is that you want to see, and then you have the ability to create that. And like for people who want to depict biblical scenes, I mean, stock photography is not very.
Yep.
There's not a lot out there for that. A lot of it's really cheesy and terrible. And I can even pull up some images here in a moment and show you, like, you can generate things that look as if somebody had a DSLR camera in first century culture when Jesus is feeding 5,000
Mm-hmm.
people. Like, it's incredible. So there is that. I love that. While I went to art school and I have spent many, many years honing my craft, I love that a pastor who maybe serves two different churches and out in the country or whatever, rural area, far apart, who could
Mm-hmm.
never afford to hire someone like me, can use generative AI to depict a story or something that they want to show and have their message be that much more effective. So that's one of the ways. Another way that I have really appreciated what AI can do is that there are some services that will allow you to translate into another language, even your own voice and your own video, to show people who maybe don't speak the same language as you, whatever it is that, whatever your
Yeah.
message is,
Yep.
so you can
Yep.
convey that in a whole new way, which I think is pretty incredible. Now, I wouldn't want to ever deceive people into thinking that I've all of a sudden learned Spanish, but it's pretty amazing to think that you can run your video. Like, I attend a church that has our church is called Mosaic. We speak, I don't know, 5 or 6 different languages in our church, and every Sunday you will always hear scripture read in another language and then in English.
Hmm.
And so that might be French or Spanish. Our church is called Mosaic, and our tagline is that we're a dynamic mosaic of Jesus followers.
Yep. Yep.
When I told my pastor about this technology, he got really excited and he said, "Wow, like, I could be the one to read the scripture in another language and then
Oh,
and then read it in English, without having
yeah.
known that language." I have an example I can share with you if you want to
Sure.
see it.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing about this is you'll notice that it even sort of deep fakes my mouth so that it moves as well. So this is just a short little demo of that technology. And as much as I would love to be bilingual, well, I only speak English. I would love to speak a language like Spanish. The only Spanish I know comes from the Mexican restaurant menu. But through the power of I can speak Spanish in a pretty convincing native way using a tool called HeyGen. Let's back this up and you can hear it. Hola amigos, Jason Moore aquí. Y por mucho que me encantaría ser bilingüe, bueno, solo hablo inglés. Me gustaría hablar español. El único español que sé viene del menú del restaurante. Pero gracias al poder de la IA, puedo hablar español de una manera bastante convincente y nativa usando una herramienta llamada Hagen.
That's
So,
cool. That's cool.
yeah. So now I would disclose through the power of AI, I want you to hear this message in your own language today,
Hmm.
and to share it in that way, not for somebody to think that all of a sudden I learned how to speak Spanish. It's funny, every time I show that clip, Zoom says, "Confirm your speaking languages." It sounds like you have switched to a different language. No, I haven't. But I love the thought that we can bring more equity to the world through
Uh-huh.
technology that would allow somebody, without meaning to. Sometimes we are very kind of um, Caucasian centric.
Yep.
We might do things in a way that are leave people out.
Yep.
And even in our stock photography and things like that to capture a better picture of the world and who lives in it and so
Hmm.
on. So um, I'm a fan of using AI for those things. It's really great for helping you when you get stuck brainstorming. If you're looking for a great illustration to help
Yep.
people, like a verbal illustration, like I'm looking for a metaphor that will help me communicate this
Yeah.
idea to people who wouldn't understand it. Um, Kind of doing modern day parable, but allowing AI to help you. So those are some of the positive ways that I have used it. I'll share one more just example here with you. I really should have shared this when I got in. Where did my window go here? Hold on just a second. Um, I should have shared this when I was talking about images, but I was working with a pastor who was preaching from Jeremiah 18. So Jeremiah goes to the potter's house and he's looking for a word from the
Mm-hmm.
Lord. And of course, when the potter is crafting whatever the potter was crafting at the wheel, it becomes misshapen and marred. And the potter doesn't simply throw the clay away and leave the wheel,
Hmm.
but takes the clay and reforms it into something new.
Yep.
And that's when the word of the Lord comes to Jeremiah that we are like clay in the hands of the potter. And so the pastor that I was working with on this service said, I have a story like this that I want to tell during my sermon. I said, oh, tell me. He said, I was a 13-year-old kid. My family took a vacation to a Native American reservation. As a 13-year-old, I thought this is going to be stupid. I don't want to do this. Didn't want my parents to know that when I got there, I thought it was actually kind of cool. But he said there was this Native American man who came out with a big lump of clay and he sat it on a wheel and he began to pump
Mm-hmm.
that wheel with his foot. And he said he began to pump the wheel just a little too fast, and it started to spin, really wobbly. And then it like the clay broke into three pieces and hit the ground. And he said we all just sat there kind of mesmerized. And he went and he picked up the pieces, and they had bits of debris and dirt and
Yep.
grass in it. And he reformed it, and then he formed something. And he said we just sat there completely silent and just inspired by what happened in that moment. And I said, man, what a great story. Do you have any pictures from that vacation? And he said, man, Jason, it was the 80s. We didn't carry cameras around in our pockets like we do now. I didn't snap a picture. And I said, well, do you mind if I use AI to generate an image so that when you tell that story, we can put an image on the screen? He's like, no, go for it. That'd be great. And so using a program called Midjourney, I described what he described in his story. And so this is an AI
Hmm.
generated image of a Native American man making a clay pot. And so as he was telling that story, that image came up on the screen, and you could almost hear an audible reaction in the
Hmm.
room as that was happening. And he moved on. Now, he didn't say this was generated in AI or whatever,
I was gonna
but
ask you again to cite those things or how you cited those things.
yeah, so you don't actually have to, according to all of the apps, anything
Mm-hmm.
you create with an AI, in the same way that you don't have to say I Googled and found this information. Sometimes
Gotcha.
it's
Yep.
good. Sometimes it's good to say I went to Google and
Mm-hmm.
he could have said without I think it being a distraction. He could have said, now unfortunately I didn't take a picture of that when I was a kid, but here's what it might have looked like
Yep.
through the power of AI or whatever. The next day, I led a workshop on AI and I shared with the participants. So we did this as an evening service on Friday night, and on Saturday, I did a workshop. And I shared that with people, and I said, now, how does that make you feel? And some people in the room were like, that was the most powerful moment of the sermon for me. Others were like, it makes me uncomfortable that that's AI. I don't know if I feel
Uh-huh.
how I feel about that. And it reminded me of a time, another story from my childhood when I lived about 5 blocks from the church that I grew up going to. And every once in a while in the summer, I'd walk down if I didn't have anything going on, and I'd pop in, say hi to the pastor and the secretary and all that. And the pastor was out to lunch, and I popped into the secretary's office, and she said, "Hey, Jason, can you put this mail on the pastor's desk for me?" And I was like, "Sure." So I went and I tossed the mail on his desk, and I noticed a book sitting there that I'd never seen before. that said 1001 sermon illustrations. And I was like, what is that?
Mm, mm-hmm.
And so I opened the book up and I start looking at some of these illustrations, and I recognized a few of them, or they were stories that he had told. And for a moment I was like, wait a minute, that's not authentic. Like, that wasn't his story. And
Yeah.
then I realized that I had remembered that story and the truth behind it for a very long
Uh-huh.
time. And so in my view, I mean, whether you download a stock photo that illustrates an idea, or you generate it with AI, or you draw it yourself, or you go out and you snap a picture, anything that you're going to use to communicate the gospel in a way that's going to connect and be memorable
That's
and
good.
moving, I think is helpful. And let's also just consider for a moment that we don't know if Jesus knew a man who had two sons, one of which
Yep.
squandered his
Yep.
wealth, and or if that was a story to help us understand the nature of
Yep.
God, or us
Yep.
as the prodigal son, or us as the brother who
Mm-hmm.
found himself a little frustrated by the whole thing. So um, what I like to tell people is that if Jesus tells us that the stones will cry out,
Hmm.
if a burning bush can talk, if Balaam's donkey can have a conversation with him, then God, the Holy Spirit, can arrange the bytes and the bits inside of this technology to produce something that can be moving and meaningful. And so I take a very prayerful approach to when
Yeah.
I'm using AI. Before I generate an image, I'm going to pray, Holy Spirit, join me in this. Let's co-create something together,
Yep.
and trust that the Holy Spirit's going to guide the technology to do what it needs to do.
That's good. That's good. Again, if you're joining us tonight, feel free to put questions in the chat or hang on to them. We will have a Q&A time at the end. Either way, I don't know if you can see it, Jason, but my wife says that joked about buying stock photos because as good Christians, we would never just copy and paste
Right,
a
right.
stock photo.
Well, the good news is if you're not broadcasting it, which everybody's doing now, but
Uh-huh.
you are not violating copyright to use it in the course of religious assembly according to the
Correct.
Copyright Act of 76. So you're allowed to use any
Good.
image from any source in the course of religious assembly. It's a little different when you're streaming it because then you're not technically in
Yep.
it. But yeah, I hear you. Oh, and I didn't get to this point, but one stock photo is about 35 bucks or
Yep.
so, 25 to 35 bucks.
I remember
You
those
can
days.
Yes, you can buy a subscription to Dolly and ChatGPT, the Pro version, for $20 a month, and it'll make images.
Yep.
So you can. There are also some free image generators out there that you can use, and you don't have to pay anything for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, what excites me a lot about the positives is that for not very much money, and without having to go back to school to become a designer, pastors and other leaders can create really moving content for worship. I do some seminars on this topic, and I'll show people how to use it for sermon series planning. And what we don't ever want to do is become so reliant on the technology that we're letting
Yep.
it drive where we go. But it's great for helping you get unstuck. It's
Mm-hmm.
great for it can save you amazing amounts of time. Like if you say, I want to do a sermon series on Jesus miracles, can you provide me a draft framework? It'll go and find all of them, and it'll give you all of the verse numbers and all that. I mean, you might have to
That's
spend
good.
4 or 5 hours looking all that stuff up,
Mm-hmm.
and Chat GPT or Claude or Gemini or whichever version you like to use can do all that work for you, and then you get to be you're driving it because you're telling it
Mm-hmm.
what you want to accomplish, but then you get to sort of be the decider of which of these things do I like and which do I not like, and those kinds of things. So
That's good
um,
stuff.
yeah,
Let's talk problems here real quick. You've kind of
yep,
alluded to some of the possible problems. And one problem that I was reminded of when you were sharing about, hey, can you produce a photo of a Native American man doing pottery? I think it was Google a couple months ago that had the problem with like, can you give me a picture of this a samurai warrior or a picture of King Henry, and it refused to produce a Caucasian person.
yes,
And the reason why is because there's a programmer behind
Yep.
the action. We think sometimes, oh, I'm talking to this entity that is floating in midair and is not affected by anything. But in reality, you're actually talking to kind of a version of a person or a group of people, which brought all of their biases and all of their stuff into the programming process. Now, I think Google cleaned that up and they took a massive stock hit for that debacle.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
that's one problem is don't forget there's a programmer behind the work and then go on from there.
Yes. Yeah, this topic comes up a lot when I'm teaching about this, and I write extensively about it in the book. I have a whole chapter on sort of ethics and bias and all that kind of stuff. Um, I would just say this: know that AI itself is not biased,
Hmm.
but the people. Sometimes it's the programmers, but sometimes it's not even the programmers that are biased. It is the data that it learned from that is biased.
Mm.
So I'll show you a little demo here I did prompting images for Jesus, because if you don't tell it what to do, Jesus often, if you just say, "Give me an image of Jesus," doing whatever,
Hmm.
the biases that are built into all of the things that it has studied to learn who Jesus is and how to generate an image of Jesus are biased. So if you just type this is using a program called Stable Diffusion. I did a little experiment and I just said, "Give me an image of Jesus by the Sea of Galilee," and this is what it produced: a very European looking,
Yep.
kind of a white Jesus. And then I
Yep.
said,
Jim
"Well,
Jim Jim Caviezel Jesus.
yes, there you go." And then I said, "Give me an African American Jesus," and so it gave
Uh-huh.
me that. That was the Caucasian. I skipped Caucasian Jesus too. Um, Here's the other African American. A little strange that he's wearing a cross. Obviously,
Mm.
AI doesn't quite get the symbolism there. Here's one
Funny.
that's a Chinese Jesus, although that could also be a Jedi, I think, maybe.
Uh-huh.
And here's a Korean Jesus. I asked it for Hispanic Jesus
Yep.
by the Sea of Galilee. And then here's a really novel idea. What if you said a Middle Eastern Jesus? And then you end up getting
Hmm.
a Jesus that actually looks like maybe somebody from that region. And then
Mm-hmm.
I always joke that a lot of times we create Jesus to look like Kenny Loggins. And so just to compare, I asked
Hmm.
for Kenny Loggins by the Sea of Galilee, and there we go. Uh, but one of the things I really love about AI is that we can get around some of those biases. I have always been a little bit careful about representing Jesus in a personified sort of way,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like sometimes the faces that we put on Jesus do more to create a barrier than to draw people in. And so I love
Yeah.
that I can do this. I can use AI to say, "Give me a silhouetted image of Jesus on the
Hmm.
Sea of Galilee,"
That's good.
and it can do that, and I can have it any pose, anything that I'd like. And so then you get to sort of fill in your mind what Jesus looks like there, rather than me making it creating Jesus in my likeness. Let your brain kind of fill that in. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are biases. There's obviously the concern around fake news and the
Yep.
ways that
Yep.
these two images were going around for a while last year. That one on the left was an AI generated image of an attack at the Pentagon that actually got a little bit of news for a minute, and it
Hmm.
was fake. And if you know what to look for, like I can Photoshop a better image of the Pentagon with smoke out in front of it than AI. Gets a little
Yeah.
confused at barriers. And then that image of the shark on the right is completely AI generated and
Mm-hmm.
was a story for a bit. I would again just suggest that this is not an AI problem. This is a human problem,
Yep.
because somebody had to tell the AI to create those images to
Yep.
sort of defraud people. So I think one of the responsibilities that we have as ministers of the gospel is, how do we help people be more discerning about the
Mm-hmm.
messages that are coming in? Because the truth is, we can no longer say seeing is believing.
Yep.
It used to be that we could say seeing is believing. I just need to see it with my own eyes. Well, now I can create just about anything and you can see it and it isn't necessarily real. So, how do we help our congregations understand this new world that we're living in? And I do think there may be an opportunity for us here when we live in a world where things can be produced artificially.
Mm-hmm.
um, I think there may be a longing for what's real and true,
Hmm.
and what does that mean for us in the church? How do we help people engage in a way that feels authentic and real in a world where inauthentic and artificial things are just everywhere? So
Yeah.
I think we need to lean into that a bit.
This is a massive concern, but like, do you have any concern with like self-awareness and kind of the transhumanism concerns like that AI will begin to think for itself and then begin to, obviously
Yeah.
the whole Terminator joke, become a danger, but not a danger. Just thinking for itself is definitely disconcerting that it would begin
Yes.
to no longer need human connection.
I do have some concern. I've read the same articles that you referred to about Elon Musk, and there were a handful of other leaders in the space that were like, we need to pause it. I also have a friend that works for Microsoft at a high level, helping the government write legislation for AI, and kind of her job is to be a liaison to the government. And she was sharing with me that um, we can't just pause it because other
Hmm.
bad actors
Yeah,
will not pause it. So if we pause it for 6 months and China continues, we may find ourselves in a really bad position
yeah.
because I believe she told me she was at a conference recently that was like a defense weaponry conference or something, and every new weapon, I think, is either required or pretty much all of them now have AI built in some way,
Hmm.
which is a little, definitely gives you some Skynet,
Yeah, yeah.
Terminator vibes or whatever. I have read that AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, which is when it becomes self-aware, is anywhere from impossible to 10 years away. And then I read things that say it could be here by the end of the year. So I
Hmm.
think it's all a really big guess right now.
Yeah.
I do know they're doing what they can to sort of, the government is working on regulation and all those kind of things. Um, I guess the thing that constantly is in the back of my head is that none of this is going to is going to take God by surprise.
That's good.
God is has dominion over all of these things, and although we have free will and we can use the gifts that God gave us for good things or not good things, but I just I have a sense of I have some apprehension, but I also have a sense of peace that um, we're going to navigate this in a way where we don't lose control of it.
Hmm.
That doesn't that doesn't mean that I don't get concerned about what happens. Every once in a while when you're playing with it, it does some odd things. But part of the reason it does odd things is that it has also studied all of our literature and it's
Hmm.
watched our movies and it's familiar with scripts, and so there's constantly this uh, fictional story about AI taking over, and so AI has studied that, and sometimes will mimic those stories and things. I also think a little bit of an odd thought, but I also think that there's a way in which AI, because it could become purely unbiased in the future if we put in the right regulations and all that, might help us solve some of the division that we
Hmm.
experience now. And I even said to my dad the other day, we're a little bit on opposite sides of the political fence, and we're talking about how, because he even has a little bit of apprehension about AI and thinking it could be an evil thing or whatever. And I said, if AI does rise up against us, maybe it'll be the thing that finally brings us back together.
Hmm.
That we are trying to come, we'll come together for. I can't help but think about back during 9/11, how that was the most contentious election we'd ever had up until that point, because we didn't know who the winner was, and there was
Hmm.
temple chads and hanging chads,
Yep.
and because of what had happened in those moments. I mean, you saw both houses of Congress stand on the steps of the
Hmm.
Capitol and sing
That's
Amazing
true.
Grace, or God Bless America, I think it was. And I remember those images where we were like more united than we had ever been as a country,
Yep.
because we had sort of common enemy and what was happening there. I'm not suggesting I want that to happen, but I do
No,
wonder
I agree. I agree.
if there are some possibilities where AI might help us unite and
Hmm.
solve problems that might come up. I also think about how I've already been hearing some things about medical breakthroughs that AI has been able to
Yep.
take a look at certain things. Um, I don't have the specifics on the tip of my brain, but I heard something about AI looked at, analyzed the Dead Sea Scrolls and found some things that had never been seen before
Hmm.
because it was able to analyze it in a whole different way. Like I do wonder what incredible. I mean, it might be that we through AI can cure cancer and
Hmm.
other diseases, and so I think there are wonderful possibilities, and obviously it can be used for bad things too.
Yeah.
So.
No, absolutely. Um, Pause here for a question there. I have my thoughts on it, but I'd love to hear yours. So, Adriana says that she's seen AI generated images of biblically accurate angels. What are your thoughts on these images or other images claiming to be visually correct?
Well, AI is far from correct. Anybody that's generated very many images knows that it doesn't know how many fingers we have, and it does weird things with ears and all of that. So I think it's a bold claim to say visually correct. But I do think that it's interesting. You get some interesting results from AI um, that are unexpected, and I think cause for conversation at times. I think a lot about, I don't know how many of you ever watched on Saturday mornings Bob Ross, the painter, the guy with the big afro haircut, and he
Hmm.
spoke very calmly, and just he would in a half an hour take a canvas and make a scene. And one of the things that he would sometimes do is, bump something with the brush the wrong way or something, and he'd say, "Oh, that's just a happy accident." And I've had a lot of happy accidents with AI where I did something that I didn't. I described something and maybe I didn't use the right words or whatever, and something came out that was not at all what I intended, but it was very useful and a happy accident. And even if those biblically accurate angels are not quite right, do they give us anything that creates an interesting
Hmm.
dialogue or whatever? So again, I like to think that if we are creating with these tools and the Holy Spirit is present in our process, then the Holy Spirit helps to shape some of those outputs, whatever they might be. But I'll say this. I have sort of three guiding principles that I like to think about when I'm using AI. I would encourage you to think about what yours are. The first of them is that AI should be a do it with you, not a do it for you,
Hmm.
as a general rule. So don't say, "Hey AI, write me a sermon." It'll do that, but there's AI has no business preaching the gospel.
Hmm.
Now, I think AI is great to help you take your sermon and make it better.
Hmm.
You can say to AI with your sermon, "Hey, this is what I'm going to preach about. Where does my logic break down?" Or I want you to take on the perspective of a skeptic. I'm preaching
Hmm. I've heard that one.
on
Yeah.
yep, on tithing, and I want you to poke holes in my sermon, and then you'll address them better. So I like to think of AI as something that doesn't do it for you, but does it with you. And so there are lots of ways to use it like that. The second one, very similar, related, I guess, is to just remember you have a soul. AI does not have a soul. And if you don't bring your soul to the conversation, then there is no soul in the conversation. So
Mm-hmm.
if you farm out your ministry to AI, if you ask it to write your sermon or to write your Bible study or to produce an image without giving it enough input or any of that, if you don't bring your soul to it, there's no soul in it, and you will get
Mm-hmm.
soulless content out of it. Um, I think we've got to remember that we are co-creators with Christ, and when we bring our soul and the Holy Spirit along with it to the tool, then the Holy Spirit is present in it. But when we just ask a simple question or give it a command or a query or whatever, it doesn't um, it doesn't produce you know good
Yep.
stuff. I guess that's the last one, is that it's a conversation, not a query,
Yep.
or just a command. It is a conversation, and so you have to go back and forth with it to get good stuff out of it. And then I guess the other thing I would say is that my another set of guiding principles that I think a lot about. I'm a United Methodist. I'm a Wesleyan. And John Wesley had three simple rules that he talked about. He said, do good, do no harm, and stay in love with God.
Hmm.
And for me, those are really good guidelines for how we use AI to do as much. First, to do no harm. We can do harm with AI and the way that we use it. And if we're not, we got to be careful and measured and not become overly reliant. Do good. I think the idea of using um, translation to get inside somebody else's head when you're preaching. So, like, if you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to think of you could say to the chatbot, I want you to take on the perspective of a single mom who works two jobs to make ends meet,
Hmm.
and I'm going to preach on giving 10% of your income. Where do I need help? And it'll come back and give you, theoretical sort
That's
of
good.
uh, arguments that it will help you get outside your head a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not preaching. It's not asking it to preach for you. It's just asking you to help identify the things that might not work. Um, I love the idea that we can use it for translation, like I said, to include more people, to create images that are more representative of the world we live in, and so on. And then the last one, and this is maybe the most important thing of all. It's probably the most important thing I can say about AI, and that is that we want to stay in love with God and never become so reliant on the technology
Mm-hmm.
that it becomes our proxy Holy Spirit.
Hmm.
Um, I'll be honest. There was a day I was writing my book, and if you want, by the end, I'll show you the cover. It's we've got a
Yeah, we will.
publication
We
date. It's
will.
coming out in October. But anyway, I there was a day that I went to write, and I pulled up Chat GPT, which I admit right in the beginning of the book, I'm going to use some of these tools while I'm writing
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like if I'm talking about it, I need to demonstrate it. And there are places where like I used it for research. So like help me outline the history of artificial intelligence. I don't know all that stuff. I could Google it, but I also can use ChatGPT
Yep.
or Gemini or Claude, which is one of my favorites, to help me with that. Um, anyway, there was a day that I went to write, and I opened up ChatGPT, and the screen was blank. None of my old conversations were there. I refreshed. I started to get panicky. Where's all my stuff? I went to my phone. I tried it on the phone app. Everything was gone. Basically, the service was down. And for a minute, I was like, well, I can't write today. And I closed my laptop.
Hmm.
And then I thought, you know what? I've written 12 books. This is the first one I've ever had Chat GPT for. Why am I already too reliant on this technology that I can't think without it? And that scared me a little bit. So I opened the
Hmm.
laptop back up and I started writing. Um, and so what I fear is that when you see how powerful this is,
Mm-hmm.
you will be blown away by what it can do. If you are in a church that does children's sermons,
Mm-hmm.
I have had so many pastors tell me I took my adult sermon, I threw it into Chat GPT. I said, "Give me a children's sermon based on this," and it gave me like the most incredible children's sermon I'd ever seen. You can ask
That's
it to
great.
write reflection questions, and
Uh-huh.
there's just so many great things it'll do. If you're not careful, you will become so. We shouldn't go to Chat GPT first. We
Oh,
should go to the Holy Spirit first. We should study, we should pray, and then use this as a tool to help us refine our ideas and all of that. So stay in love with God. Don't become so reliant on AI that it's the first place you go. And my biggest concern is this, that we become like the passengers on the Axiom, which was the ship in the movie Wall-E, if you ever saw that. Um, in the movie Wall-E, we have polluted the planet to the point where all the humans have to get on these big sort of cruise ships that are cruising through space, finding a new place to live. And Wally is this robot that ends up on one of these ships through a set of circumstances. And when he gets there, all of the human beings are like obese, floating around on these carts, and AI brings everything to them, food
hmm.
and clothing, and it takes them around the ship, and then they finally get back to Earth, and they can barely move. They can't walk anymore because they've let AI do everything for them. They've floated around on carts. And what I hope doesn't happen is that we become so reliant on the
Hmm.
technology that we let our spiritual muscles atrophy. You have
Yep.
to wrestle with the text. AI doesn't have a soul.
Yeah.
It can't understand the context. So balanced, measured, and how do we stay in love with God and not
That's
become
good.
overly reliant on
That's
the
really good.
tools.
Yeah, I just add on to that question specifically that representations created are not themselves the thing, and so they're never going to be identical. I know there's a big debate around the chosen nowadays. It's like um, he didn't actually say that. He didn't actually look like that. And my pushback is always, well, if you're ever going to create art at all, whether it's a painting or a movie or anything, it's going to be a representation. And there's
Yes.
always it's not going to be the thing itself, and that's okay. So,
Yeah.
well,
I'm a
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say I'm a fan of that thinking, and um, I think there's a lot of different places you can go with that conversation. But
Yep,
I've had a lot of people also just push back, thinking, well, AI is going to stop artistry. Like people aren't going to create anymore because AI. Well, the same thing was said when cameras were invented.
correct.
In the late 1800s, the camera technology came on the scene, and people said it's not art because it's made by a machine. And doesn't that sound familiar? It wasn't until the 1920s that people started to accept photography as art.
Hmm.
And so every technology, Photoshop when it first came out, was seen as harmful to artists, and artists still create.
Yep.
So um, yeah,
Yeah.
similar but different idea. But I think there are lots of good possibilities there.
Good question here. Tough question. Very, very heady. What separates the omnipotence, the omniscience, the omnipresence of AI from God? I think the question is getting at, in some way, AI feels kind of divine. Like it has some of those attributes. So how is how
Yeah,
is how is God different?
I am so glad you asked that question because this is one of the things that I write about in the book. And I think that we've got to be really, really careful and mindful of that question that people are going to be asking in the future. And the reason I think it's such an important question for us to think about is that in a first of all, I think we've all probably had moments in our lives where we have asked God for something. We've prayed, God, uh, help my child feel better. God, help me get this job, whatever the thing may be. And God's answer sometimes is wait. Sometimes God's answer is not now. Sometimes, well, I guess it's the same answer, is no.
Mhm.
We don't always get the answers we want. Um, and I wonder what it's going to mean for people in the future because you can go to ChatGPT and it's always going to give you an answer.
Mhm.
Even if it says, well, this is my best guess, or I'm a large language model, I don't have the answer, but, and then it'll give you an answer. Um, I think we're going to have to figure out how do we help people connect with God when this omniscient, omnipresent AI.
Mhm.
And just recently they announced that ChatGPT is the new version that's not out yet, but will be out in the next, I don't know how long, several weeks or whatever. Chat GPT 4 lowercase o, not 4.0,
Hmm.
um, is going to be multimodal in a way that you can show it video and photos and talk to it without ever typing anything. And it's going to communicate in a whole new way. So I can talk to it like I talk to a person. I can pray to it like I pray to God in a sense, and I can
Hmm.
ask for any answer, and it's going to give it to me. So I just wonder what is that going to mean for us as we retool and in ministry, and then again, um, how do we help people experience an authentic God with in a world where an artificial God, so to speak, is also present and will give all the answers? I don't have the
Yeah.
answer to that question,
Yeah.
but I think it's something we've got to think about, and it's a big one.
Yeah. No, I think that's an age-old question too. I mean, the heart of idolatry is ascribing, godly attributes to a thing that is not,
Yes.
whether that is praying to a stick or a rock and asking for rain or it's same basic concept. And as you talk to, I think to myself, like, these aren't just AI problems. These are,
Right.
um, I mean, Google makes us all knowing, we have
Yeah.
access to all the information in the world at our fingertips. I'm not omnipresent, but I can be anywhere in the US in a couple of hours when,
Yeah.
100 years ago that was unheard of and so on. So,
Right.
Um,
And I think about the people who say, well, Chat GPT is going to start writing everybody's sermons or whatever.
hmm
Um, I know of plenty of services where someone can go download a sermon and preach it and never wrestle with it. And I think that's just as dangerous
Yep.
as going. In fact, there's a way in which it's probably more dangerous than using Chat GPT, where I can at least go and give it a topic and
Yep.
some of my own personal reflections. I don't think that's how we should be using it, but just preaching somebody else's sermon where I don't bring any of myself to it. That's where the whole idea that you have a soul and bring your soul to the
Yep.
conversation comes in. So,
Yep.
um, I'm cautiously optimistic, and I hope that people will take serious the restraint piece of it. That's the thing
hmm
that I think we've got to be most careful
Yeah.
about.
And that's a tough one because humans don't do that well. We tend to take the path of least resistance, you know. I think of
Yes.
the technology of an iPad. While a great blessing, you put it in front of your child and suddenly they're quiet and compliant for hours on end, and before you know it, you've caused some harm over 5, 7 years of that. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yep. Absolutely. And so it's not the tool itself, but it's how we use it. That it's. I
hmm
mean, because an iPad can be used as for
yep,
very good purposes and very bad purposes at the
yep,
same time. You know.
yep. We have a few parents probably hanging out. A few more will come. Obviously, I hope you've already hit a lot of these things, but if you have a parent of a teenager, parent of a child, nowadays, what are some of your thoughts, advice for parenting in a world of AI? If you're a teenager, if you're 8-year old, if you're 5-year old, what's their involvement with the technology?
Yeah. I think I have a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old, so my kids aren't little anymore, and I don't know exactly where the lines we don't want to cross are, but there are some really neat applications that I've seen for kids. You can ChatGPT has the new version isn't out yet, but for a while they've had an app on the phone that will let you talk to it. And
Hmm.
so I have seen people tell their kid a bedtime story by asking ChatGPT, and you can
Yep.
basically say anything to it. Tell me a story about a giant teddy bear who went to the moon and ate ice cream with an alligator, and
hmm
it'll weave this incredible story, and it comes out in real time. And like I think about how kids can bring their imaginations to life in really exciting ways. Um, I have my 18-year-old has struggled at times with relationship development and some things like that. He had a night where he was really feeling lonely, just having a very difficult time and very on the edge of depression and some things.
hmm
And I I just did a little experiment with him. I said, "Here, let me show you what ChatGPT can do." And so I had ChatGPT have a conversation with him, and I said, "Ethan, this is just tell ChatGPT your name and who you are." So ChatGPT starts asking him some questions. Hey, Ethan, what do you like to do? And so he told him, and he said, "I like to draw." And she's like, "What kind of pictures do you like to draw?" And he started to tell. And so this whole conversation began to happen. And this always feels a little crazy to say, but my son started to tear up a little bit because somebody actually, and
Huh.
it felt to him like somebody really cared about what he did and who he was and all those kinds of things. And I mean, he understands that it's AI and all that, but for him, it actually kind of got him out of a bad place. And I was shocked at how effective that was and helpful that was for him. Um, so I think there are opportunities there. My my son, one of the things he's really enjoyed doing here recently, there's an app that came out. Folks who are listening might want to play with this. It's called Udio, Udio, like studio without the
hmm
st. Udio.com, and it will make a song that sounds unbelievably realistic, um, that you can either create your own lyrics and describe, I want a country song, I want a marching band song, I want a, whatever, or you can just give it a topic. I want a song about uh, teddy bears on the moon eating ice cream or whatever, and
Hmm.
it'll create a song that is legit, like you would not believe that some human beings didn't record. It has guitar solos in it, breaks. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So my son has just had such a great time
Hmm.
creating music and having fun with that and laughing and all of those kinds of things. So there's another tool, and then the image generation stuff. You know, my daughter likes to do uh, coloring pages or whatever. So just like
Yep.
as a
I've
so
seen
she'll
that. Yeah.
yeah, so she'll be like, Dad, can you create me a coloring page of, and she'll just say whatever it
Uh-huh.
is, and I can ask Dali, which is connected to ChatGPT, to create a coloring page of whatever it is that she wants. And I mean, sometimes it looks a little weird or whatever, but it's kind of neat that we can create custom things. And so I guess what I love more than anything about AI is that if you have a song in your heart but no musical ability, it can create
Hmm.
it. If you have an image in your head but no ability to draw, AI can draw it for you. Um, if you're stuck and you're trying to write something and you just can't get it to come out right, you can give it your concept and your idea,
Hmm.
and it'll massage it and help it, sound better.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, it'll write code. There's a influencer I follow who wrote a side scroller video game in 3 hours using AI, and he doesn't know anything about coding, but AI did all of it, and he just told it what I wanted. I want the character to move to the right, and when I hit this button, I want him to jump, and he just did all that work, and it did it. So I think it's going to help us to be more creative than we've ever been before, and it's going to take a lot of the hard stuff that might prevent a novice from doing these things to be able to do them.
Yeah. Another question here. Again, good question. There's a lot of out there about the rise of technology, social media, and AI related to the rise of mental illness, depression, and anxiety. Do you agree? I think a good example of that is like, it's pretty clear that in starting back in like 2008 or so, my dates could be wrong. They're mentally something began to shift in our young people. And I do tend to believe that it was the rise of the iPhone and
Mm-hmm.
the that technology having a computer in our pocket was not obviously provided a lot of good, but it also I think it did correlate to the rise of some depressions, mental illness, things like that amongst our young people. So, do you see that being a problematic in from what we've heard tonight? It doesn't seem like that would be as problematic as say a lot of social media exposure is pretty clearly not a positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
Internet access all the time, not a positive thing. Do you feel like AI contributes to that
I think there are
or
it's a
can?
double-edged sword. So I do think the
Hmm.
possibility exists. I think that if you're not careful, you can lean into some of those biases that are there and not recognize that they're biases. So it might turn your opinion in a way that's not fair or accurate or whatever. Of course, that's not an AI only problem. We get that from listening to
Sure.
one source of news, whatever that
Yep.
side of the coin that might be. Um, I think one of the things that scares me a little bit is the potential for isolation.
Yes.
We can begin to communicate with AI and sort of forget about the people around us because AI can give us all the answers. And now I mean, think about, I mean, I'm a fan of Siri and Alexa and all these apps, but think about what we might have had to do before
Hmm.
if we wanted to find our way somewhere. I might have had to call my mom and say, "Hey, how do I get to, or whatever? Dad, what's the best way to get to, now I just use my GPS. I don't have to make that call. I don't have to ask that question." We might have relied on a friend, phone a friend to get information, and now we can just ask, "Hey, Siri, look up, whatever." So I mentioned I do these trainings, and I was showing how to use this for sermon series development, and somebody said, and I cringed when I heard it. I'm like, no, no. They said, oh, good. Now I don't have to have my team to help develop worship. I'm like, no, 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 no. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
This is to help you get unstuck. We don't want to
Yep.
become so isolated that we just ask Chat GPT for everything. So I think we've got to be careful about maintaining relationships all of those things. But again, I also think there are some really cool opportunities as well. And so, um, I was my son loves to draw comic book characters and stuff like that, and I was showing him how you can take those things into certain apps, and you can generate other poses and all that from the
Mm-hmm.
stuff you've already drawn, and so that was really exciting to him, and to think about, could you make your own comic book or
Yep.
your own little movie or whatever, and so. Um, yeah, I mean, again, double-edged sword. I think there's some potential for harm, and there's potential for good.
Yeah. You mentioned, you and your son using it as a tool to work through something. That sounds great. But I remember I was watching Megan,
Oh yeah,
the terrorizing
yes,
doll movie. But the first 30 minutes is actually interesting because Megan is counseling the young girl, and the young girl, you mentioned isolation.
yeah,
She's not talking to anybody. She's not having any human interactions. But when the doll talks to her, like, share your feelings, and only is encouraging and only affirms,
yeah,
the daughter really begins to open up. And so I could see possible without, a family being involved in that, without checks and balances, that could become a place where you kind of get lost in. Because like you said, with no soul, there's no risk. They're not gonna, if they're programmed not to push back on you or to challenge you
yeah.
or to, it's
Well,
easy.
and that's one of the things that is almost a little frustrating sometimes when you're using a chat bot, is that it's so agreeable.
Hmm.
Um, it'll do whatever you want, and so I sometimes will have to tell it, I want you to take on the opposite
Yep.
perspective. I want you
Yep.
to poke holes in what I'm saying. Um, and sometimes it struggles to do that. Like
Hmm.
it'll get, like when I was writing my book, I would finish a chapter and I'd say, okay, now I want you to take on the role of AI skeptic, and I want you to point out all the things to me where I got my logic wrong or whatever. And it would give me a negative, but then it would give me three positives after that or whatever. I'm like, I don't need all that. I just want you to help me make the argument as clear as I can, and I don't need all
Yeah.
the fluffy stuff. So
I don't know how big a problem it is, but I do know that there are at, at least a certain percentage of men that are actually kind of having significant relationships with AI
yeah,
women, or like dating sites or whatever, and so they
I have heard about that.
prefer to interact with a, you know, non non pushback kind of individual. So,
Yeah, that of course is the downside, the worst part of this. There's a technology that it's kind of fun to play with, called face fusion, and face fusion will let you take a still photograph and a video, and it will basically deep fake the person's
hmm.
face on another face. So you can, like,
Yep.
I when
Yep.
I started playing with it, I put my face on Indiana Jones on the
Yep.
part where he goes and steals the little statue or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but in trying to learn about that technology, because I was interested in just sort of learning what it was and how it worked, I found a whole Reddit thread on how do you take out the not safe for work filter that will let you put a female's face on, or
Yes.
person's face on a pornographic video or
Hmm.
whatever. And so, that there are people that are doing that kind of thing too.
Correct.
So,
Yep.
there is harm that can be done for sure. And you may have heard about during the New Hampshire primary, someone cloned Biden's voice and did a robocall to all the Democrats and said, "Stay
Hmm.
home, save your vote for
Yep.
November."
Yep.
And a lot of people are confused by that because it sounds exactly like him, because you can
Yep.
clone a voice. And so there are things, regardless of again which side of the political fence you're on, that we've just got to be really discerning and really careful.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I forget her name. There was a social media influencer who someone one deep faked her into a pornographic video,
mm,
and she was
yeah,
absolutely devastated. Um,
yeah,
Something that's probably not going to happen to somebody who's not famous, but it's and then I also remember I was convinced that Tom Cruise was going to be in the Doctor Strange multiverse movie because
yeah,
somebody
yeah,
put him in as the Iron Man from the other universe, and
yep,
they got me. They got me.
yeah,
So
yeah.
um Yeah, so feel free to we'll open up the line in a second, but we're just getting great questions in the chat right now. So, historically, the church has been at the forefront of innovation and development. I think that's true sometimes, other times not so much, but that's fair for the vast majority of Christian history. That was often the case. But we seem to lag when it comes to technology. Why does the church lag when it comes to technology? And are we at risk of becoming irrelevant in the process?
Yeah, this is a question that's right up my alley. I've been kind of fighting for this for my whole career. The first 10 years of my ministry, I was really just trying to convince churches to put screens in their worship spaces. Um, because we're such visual learners and the
Mm-hmm.
screen is such a fixture all throughout our culture. I think the biggest reason is that people tend to confuse Jesus and the context in which they met Jesus. So people who grew
Yes.
up in the 50s and 60s, in the 70s and 80s, when really more the 80s and 90s, 90s really, uh, rejected the idea that like screens were of the devil and they were terrible
Yep.
technology. And so I used to talk a lot about new wine and old wineskins. Jesus talked
Mm-hmm.
about you can't put new wine into old wineskins or they'll break down. And the wineskin of today looks different than
Mm-hmm.
it did. And so we have to reinvigorate our tradition. um, People forget that the organ was a bar instrument, and when they first brought it into the church, it was
Hmm.
this huge controversy
Yep.
because it was a pub instrument, and then it became so sacred that taking pipe organs out of the church
Mm-hmm.
became a controversy. Um, so I think that again, I think we just get confused about what is sacred and what is not sacred.
Yep.
I I used to fight. Fight is a strong word, but churches that would not want to put a screen in their sanctuary because it would cover up the cross.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, you can put an image of the cross on
Mm-hmm.
that screen. That symbol of the cross, that is not the cross on the wall back there. That is not the cross that Jesus hung on. That is a
Mm-hmm.
representation of the cross, and it's made out of wood. But the one that's made out of pixels is also a representation. One is not more holy than the other.
That's
Something
good.
made of wood is not, something made of fabric and light is not less
Mm-hmm.
representative of the cross than. And so I think part of it is just helping people understand this is a new wineskin and a new opportunity. That's really what I talked about in my book called Both And, which was about hybrid ministry. Is that
Yep.
worship that we do online is not virtual worship or fake worship or a close proximity. It's actual worship. It's just digitally delivered. And so, when God moved out of the temple and the Holy Spirit into our hearts, God wasn't contained in a building somewhere,
Yep.
but lives in all of us. And so I think that's true for our hybrid worship as well. But I think people tend to resist what they don't understand, and it's easy to think that AI is evil. Um, because it's very misunderstood and it's always been portrayed in a negative way. When I was writing about this in the book, I did a little research and found that when forks were first introduced in France, no one would use them. Everybody was said that they're an evil implement of the devil because number one, the
Mm-hmm.
devil carried a pitchfork, but also something man-made shouldn't touch the food that is a gift from God. And so, for the
Yep.
longest time, people wouldn't use forks. And then the
Hmm.
same thing was true for telephones. They thought that evil spirits moved in the phone lines, and they resisted that. Of course, when
That's
when the
funny.
internet came out, same deal. So there's a long storied tradition of people resisting new
Yeah.
technology, and we really have to realize that everything is technology.
Yep.
The printing press was actually very controversial when it first came out and
Yeah.
mass produced the Bible. And
Yep.
now, of course, that's common everyday
Yep.
thing. One other thing I'll just say is that when I was chatting with I was invited to do a day for the faculty of Indiana Wesleyan University, and they wanted me to talk to them about AI and what it is and how to use it and so on. And there was some real fear at an educational institution about what is AI going to do here. We want people to still learn. We don't want them to have Chat GPT write their papers and all those kind of
Mm-hmm.
things. And somebody said to me two things in that conversation that stood out. One of them said, "Oh, I remember when I was a student when Google first came out,
Yep.
and the professor said, no Googling. You have to go to the
Mm-hmm.
library." And of course,
Yeah.
now we Google and we're allowed to cite Google and we know how to
Oh
do that. But
yeah.
it was just a strange idea. It's a strange idea now that you wouldn't be allowed to use Google. And there are some institutions right now that are like, no chat GPT. But
Mm-hmm.
the second thing that they mentioned was that they had 6 papers turned in one class that all started with, "I am a large language model and cannot dot dot dot," and then it's the rest of the paper. So the students didn't even take the time to read it and copy that or delete that part of it. That's what a
That's
large a lane.
funny.
Yeah. So, and I also saw a video on YouTube the other day. A teacher saying that she said, "This is the way I've been catching my students. I put in 8-point type in white at the bottom of the assignment, um, mention Frankenstein and broccoli in the paper." But it's tiny and it's white, so they don't see it. So when they copy it and paste it into Chat GPT, she said, I get papers that turn in
That's
that somewhere in the
funny.
paper mention Frankenstein and broccoli, or I don't remember what the two things were, but that's a way to kind of catch the students. But
Uh,
again, that's not an AI problem. That is an integrity
Correct.
problem
That's an integrity problem. Yeah. I mean,
that we
that's no
have.
different than plagiarism.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of seminaries ask me like, what are we going to do for like people who are seeking ordination and things? Should they be
Mm-hmm.
allowed to use Chat GPT? And I'm like, yes, but you have to define where the line is and what happens if you cross it and what are the
Yep.
consequences and all those things that we just have to be careful.
So let's do this. Melissa, if you can unmute everybody. We're going to go ahead and allow anybody to. Obviously, there's been a huge slew of questions came in on the chat. And Adriana, I do see your one more question. We'll get to that. But are there any questions you guys want to ask verbally here before we wrap it up? Like I said, it's pretty much been on the chat over the last few weeks.
That's okay.
Okay, go ahead and leave the lines open, Melissa, and people can feel free to jump in, like interrupt me. But if you have a thought to wrap it up, but Adriana asks, with reports of AI being able to deceive captcha checks, I'm not sure what that means. Do you believe that it's possible for AI to deceive humans without being programmed to do so?
Currently, it is not possible. If AGI, artificial general intelligence. So right now we live with an AI that is called weak AI or
Hmm.
narrow artificial ANI, artificial narrow intelligence. So at present, as far as we know, and if it weren't the case, it would be out. Um, AI can't do anything without human interaction. Now, a
Hmm.
human being could probably write an AI program or instruct AI to learn how to defeat CAPTCHA. CAPTCHA is where, like, if you go to a website and you want to sign up for something and it asks you to select all the buses in these pictures or type in this code that's like, partially squiggly and it's got like it, only a human should be able to recognize it.
Hmm.
A human might be able to program AI to do that, but right now AI has no will. It has no. It's not sentient, so it doesn't have
Hmm.
any agenda or anything like that. It's just algorithms at present. Again, they keep working towards, can we create artificial general intelligence,
Hmm.
which is when AI would think like a human being. It would be cognitively more or less the same. Um, and then there's another level of it called artificial superintelligence, and that's the idea
Hmm.
that AI would eventually be smarter than us.
Hmm.
So what they're trying to figure out is, can we get it to think on its own? And then if we can get it to think on its own, like, might it eventually be
Yeah.
smarter than us? And that's when things get a
Yeah.
little scarier. So
But really no scarier than being deceived by a human. I mean,
yeah,
I
well,
think of
that's
some of the scams that I've seen online or I've heard about are pretty impressive, people getting you to log into your computer and they take over your computer, mobily, and it doesn't really change it at all.
yep, that's definitely a thing. And like I said, the fake news stuff. When I saw the story about the Pentagon, I thought, I've been able to do that for 25 years. I could
Mm,
create an image like that that's better than that one with Photoshop. But this is why, friends, I think as we are thinking about our ministries, we want to help people recognize that the world has changed, and AI is only going to become more prevalent. It's only going to grow in its usage. I mean, there will come a day, we're almost there already, but there will come a day where you can't avoid AI. It's going to
hmm.
be
Yep.
in your toaster. It's going to be, if you go to the grocery, you're using AI whether you want to or not. Your vehicle is going to have AI in it. I mean, it's going to be everywhere. And I don't say that to scare us, but that's just the reality that we live in now. And um, I I think rather than run away from it, we have to kind of embrace the moment and
Hmm.
figure out how do we do ministry? How do we do life? How do we do faith in a season where AI is kind of everywhere?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think self-driving cars they're coming, man. And
Yep.
scary as it is to give power away, fatalities will go down so low when that
Yep.
comes online. So, all right, let's do this real quick. If there's no more questions, let's do. Yeah, Efren, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Maybe I'm a little old school, but like you were talking earlier, when you're scrolling and you happen to run into what I see, a video that is, I mean, clearly AI generated the video, like a picture of Jesus, like the ones you threw up when it's talking to you and praying and all of that. I just can't wrap my mind around that. I mean, is any of that real or is it just all computer generated?
Um,
Um,
it's not
it's
real.
not real.
Well, we got a little bit of a
We got a little
feedback
bit of
going here.
feedback going.
Yeah, go ahead
Here,
and
I'll mute real
mute
quick.
yourself, Efren.
All right. So the way that stuff works is that the image, there is some reality to it in that it learned to create the image of Jesus from images of Jesus that humans have
Hmm.
created.
Yeah.
The way that I always describe this for folks when they're like, how does AI create an image of Jesus or whatever? Um, it wouldn't be unlike me giving all of you a post-it note and saying, I want you to draw a picture of an island. And then I want a boat. I want you to draw a boat in front of that island. Then I want on the island for a palm tree. And then I want 3 leaves on the palm tree and 2 coconuts. And I want the boat to be a sailboat. The more I describe, you've seen enough sailboats and enough islands and enough palm trees and all that you kind of know what those things are and whether you can draw well or not. We probably get some close proximity of a boat in front of an island with a palm tree. AI has learned from looking at trillions and trillions of images of Jesus, depictions of Jesus, that Jesus typically is a guy with long hair and a beard
Hmm.
and a robe and all those kinds of things. So, in a sense, it is the realness there is that somebody along the way created these images of Jesus that it is then sort of depicting. The voice that you're hearing if Jesus is talking was probably created from some human being's voice,
Hmm.
but then cloned. So there is some human influence there, but it's artificial. So it's algorithms that have created that. I mean, I could show you some things that would just blow your mind as far as what. In fact, I'm going to play one. I'll play one short little clip. I'm not going to play all of it, but let me find it here. I cloned my own voice for a demo. So take a I'm not going to play much of this, but just take one little listen to this, and I'll explain what you're hearing. Welcome to Verses, a podcast that explores the biblical principles for how we should live our lives as Scripture encourages versus how the world says we should live. I'm your host, Jason Moore. In this first episode, we're going to explore how we should live according to Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Proverbs 3, verses... So I didn't speak one word of that. I used ChatGPT to write the script. I asked it to write a script for a podcast on Proverbs, whatever those verse numbers were. I said, I want 3 reflection questions. I want I want you to ask people to subscribe to the podcast at the end and so on. Took all of that into another application called 11 Labs, which is a voice synthesizer. And they've got a bunch of pre-made voices, but then I cloned my own voice. So I gave it several clips of me talking and it learned how to talk like me. In fact, there's even a moment there where you hear a breath before it says something. So it adds breaths and everything. And so, while that could be used for nefarious purposes, I like the thought that a pastor could take his or her sermon and put it into that software, put it into ChatGPT, say, I want you to take my sermon from last Sunday, give me a 2-minute audio version of that captures the main ideas. Take that, put it into ChatGPT, and then every week on Wednesday, you could release a 2-minute version of your sermon that I would probably say somewhere powered by AI so people don't think I'm recording it. But so in the sense that I'm a human being and I gave it my voice, that part of it is real, but the that particular configuration and all the things that I said were AI generated. I don't know if that makes that make more sense or not, but that's it. That's what's crazy about these times that we're living in.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I just thought of, like, Efren, you asked if it was real or CGI. It's both, right? It's neither. It's not real. I'm not sure if the word real is kind of confusing the issue. It is what it is. It's a computer generated issue. I think of like any painting. This kind of goes back to the angels question. Any painting, any work of art, honestly, you should check any pastor who's preaching, whether it's CGI or a pastor. You gotta be discerning and do the analysis to see what is real. Good stuff, Efren. That's a funny one. I'll give you one more thought too. Melissa, our admin here at our church, she takes my sermon and puts like little 15-second clips on social media on like reels and different things. And I thought she was going through and choosing the sections that were going out, and she's not. I guess it would be AI, right? AI is listening to my sermon and picking like 12 to 15 meaningful 15-second pass, and it nails it every time. It's like it picks like great 15-second passages, and that's all chosen by AI.
I thought I'd pull up here. I just finished the cover a couple days ago, and my publisher said it's going to be out in October. But the book is called AI and the Church: A Clear Guide for the Curious Curious and Courageous. So the book goes into everything from how we should, how we shouldn't, ethics, some how-to, and like what apps you're looking for and how to use them. There's an AI policy in the back. I think every church ought to consider what is our AI policy and
That's good.
how should we and should we not use AI. There are concerns that we have to maybe haven't really given all that much thought to around, privacy and stuff like that. Like if you're having AI analyze your attendance data, do you want to give it everybody's address and their name and financial data? What's the liability if this stuff is dumped on the internet somehow? Shouldn't be, but anyway, there's just lots of things to think about. How are we going to disclose if we're using AI or not? When do we need to? When do we not? So all those kind of things. But my hope is that it will be a good guide for people who are just getting into this. Again, I'll say this. I think whether you're curious, whether you are already convinced, whether you are dead set against it, the worst thing you could do is ignore it because it's not going away. It's going to be here from here until Jesus comes back.
Yep. Very good. Any other books or things you'd recommend people if they're interested in the topic? Obviously, definitely want to push that. Is yours available yet for pre-order on Amazon or anything like that yet?
No, but my guess is that in the next week or so, it probably will be because we just kind of finalized everything. So, there's not a ton of books out yet on this topic as far as the church goes. So, in fact, I don't know of anything else. There is a Facebook group called AI for Churches that you might check out. I participate over there quite a bit. Um, so,
And what were the programs that you recommend using that you said are
so
helpful?
yeah, I would highly recommend ChatGPT. And if you've got $20 a month to spend, it's worth the $20. ChatGPT Pro will let you generate, images as well. So you can generate text and images, and the paid version has a more sophisticated model. You're going to get better outputs from it than you would get from the standard version. There's another app that I use quite a bit called midjourney.com.
Yeah.
It's the image generator, which to me is the best of all. It creates the most photorealistic stuff. Anything that's organic looks more organic there. Another one that you might check out, there's a free version that you can use that's really, really good called Ideogram. It's spelled Ideogram. And its claim to fame, what it does better than any other generator right now is text. AI can't spell right now for some reason. When you try to generate images, most of the time the text is not spelled right. It doesn't quite understand it. I always say give it 6 months. They'll figure it out in 6 months. But Ideogram can do that better than any other app right now. And so you might check that out. I also am a fan of Claude. It's Claude.ai. Claude.ai. And it's like ChatGPT, but it's a little more, the language feels a little more natural. ChatGPT uses flowery language a lot. It uses certain phrases that you sort of know that it's AI. Claude is a little more undetectable, as it comes off as more human, is what I mean to say.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. So those are some places you can start.
Cool.
Google has an app called Gemini, and it's free to use. And Gemini will let you generate images as well. There's also the Bing, Bing, Bing Image Creator, where you can generate images for free. If you go to, just search Bing Image Creator, you'll find it. So if you want to play with this stuff, you can play with it without spending any money at all.
I think I heard you mention earlier Starry AI. Is that a thing? Is that video images? Or maybe not.
I don't think so, but
Okay.
not one that I'm familiar with. There's another one though called Leonardo.ai, like Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo. I did mention 11 Labs, which is the voice generator. You can try it for $1 for the first month, and then it's $5 after that for the cheapest plan. And that will let you generate voiceover. You can clone your own voice, but you can also use the voices that are already present in it. Udio, Udio.
Yep.
Yep. There's another one called Suno, Suno, which also generates music. I think you can do 10 tracks for free every day on Suno. And I'm not sure on Udio how many you can do. It's a brand new service. But right now, Udio I've got subscriptions to both of them. And I haven't used Suno since Udio came out because it's so good. It's just unbelievable.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us tonight, guys. Thanks for staying a couple minutes long there, Jason. And
no problem. Happy to help.
God bless y'all.